Welcome to Early Adopter, the podcast where we help make AI your unfair advantage. I'm Jess, marketing exec by day, AI experimenter by day, night, and basically every other waking moment in between at this point.
And I'm Kyle, your resident tech guru. I've spent the last decade building data systems, products, and AI tools that solve real-world problems. My goal is to cut through the noise and show you how this tech actually works for your business. Each week, we'll break down AI concepts, tools, or trends that actually matter for your business. We'll explain what it is, why you should care, and how to use it without needing a computer science degree.
So whether you're a small business owner, an entrepreneur, or you're just tech curious, grab your coffee, close that tab where you've been staring at ChatGPT for the past 3 weeks wondering what to do with it, and let's dive in. Just think of us as your guides through the wild, wonderful, and sometimes completely overwhelming world of AI.
This is Early Adopter.
Hi, welcome back to Early Adopter. I'm Jess.
And I'm Kyle.
Kyle, how's your week been?
It's been a good week, getting off to a nice summer. Had a day off yesterday and saw some friends, did a little barbecue, and excited for this weekend. Going to see some family, do some more barbecue and hanging out by the pool. So,
I mean, I know how much you love a barbecue, so this is like your dream weekend.
It really is. I mean, basically put me in a barbecue area and let me start cooking and I'm happy.
I mean, when you lived in London, you had a whole deck area specifically for grilling.
It was my one requirement, and I found out very quickly that that's not a typical London thing to have. So it was a little challenging to find.
And the weather doesn't always cooperate for a barbecue in London, but people do try. People definitely try.
Hey, I was still barbecuing in the snow and in the rain with my little umbrella over my little green egg. So it can be done.
It can be done. That is some impressive dedication.
How's your week been though, Jess?
Oh, well, Kyle, I'm moving next week. So I have been in moving hell. What you can't see right now is the fact that I am surrounded by boxes and bags and bags full of bags because I have a real problem with collecting tote bags from conferences. I do.
You love a good tote bag.
You'll be so proud of me though. I have gotten rid of a large selection of tote bags, but I thought that I had found them all. And then I was up in the loft space getting a suitcase down and I found a whole other suitcase full of tote bags. So it's a real problem. I'm trying to streamline my tote bag collection.
Moving is a good time to purge. So this is the time to do it.
It's the perfect time to purge.
You still have your background up. So we're still having the battle of the backgrounds going.
We do. Although we'll see if I have the new background up by the time we record next week, because I don't know if I'll have it, but we'll see. That'll be priority number one.
First thing I would say, that's the first thing you have to do.
That's the first thing I'm going to do is set up the new background. Don't worry, have no fear. That will be my number one priority. Forget about, I don't know, putting together the bed frame. It's going to be setting up my movie posters so that we've got something for the pod.
Perfect. Early adopter comes first.
It always does, of course. What are you talking about?
Love it.
Okay, so let's get into it. This is a slightly different week than we've had previously, but we are going to talk about the elephant in the room. We've been skirting around this a little bit, but there's a lot of the things that we're going to talk about have been on people's minds recently, so we think it's time to actually cover it, and that is the ethics of AI. And before anyone switches off and, you start thinking about this is going to be a really abstract philosophical discussion, stick with us, because a lot of the ethical choices around AI, they're not just academic. They are actually, they have real business implications that can affect your bottom line, your reputation, and even your legal liability. So it's actually very important that we talk about these.
And as always, we've tried to do the research for you and give you some of the, high level summaries here. And what we found is that AI ethics isn't just about doing the right thing, although obviously that's the most important thing. It is very important. But there really are some important implications for protecting your business and also making smarter decisions.
Yeah. And, we spend a lot of time on this show talking about how to use AI effectively. It's the whole reason that we started this podcast and, all the amazing tools and the productivity gains that you can achieve. And, all of that is true. but we would be doing our listeners a disservice if we didn't talk about the downsides and the risks and the things that can go wrong as well.
Absolutely. We're not here to fearmonger, but we're also not going to pretend this technology is all kittens and rainbows. There are there are real costs, real biases, and real risks that every business needs to understand. And frankly, some of the hype around AI is getting a little out of hand as we talk about.
1000%. And this is a huge topic with a lot of little subtopics. So we're not going to be able to deep dive into every single thing today. But we think it's important to at least, raise awareness, bring some of this to the light, and at least discuss the landscape. We'll probably end up doing dedicated episodes on each of these specific topics at a later date, and hopefully with some experts on each of the topics. Mm-hmm. But today we're just going to kind of break down a lot of the key areas that every business owner needs to understand in this area, and cover the good, the bad, and the stuff that might make you think twice about that next ChatGPT query, which we will be getting into.
The good, the bad, and the ugly.
Exactly.
Love that. And don't forget that even in a very small way, every one of us votes with our dollars sometimes. Because at the end of the day, if you want to use AI successfully, we also want to use it responsibly. And that really starts with understanding what you're getting yourself into. So let's dig into it.
Okay, this is a really big one. This is something that we hear a lot of people talking about, and a lot of people quite rightly express concerns about, and that is the environmental impact of AI.
Such a big one. And I know I've talked to quite a few people, definitely, and maybe like a Gen Z thing. Not that I'm saying they're the only ones who care about that, but I definitely have. Thing for them. And I've had a lot of Gen Z of our audience say,
yep. 1000%. So I'm going to start with a number that might shock you. Every time you ask ChatGPT or any of its equivalents a question, you are essentially taking a tiny car trip, even if you don't have a car. And when you multiply that by 1 billion daily users, which we know is, a number that is not out of the realm of possibility for ChatGPT, those numbers start to get pretty insane.
Yeah, this one really blew my mind. Going back to that billion, there are 1 billion daily queries for ChatGPT. So training a single AI model can emit as much carbon as 5 cars over their entire lifetimes. So even more impressive, ChatGPT processes that 1 billion queries per day that we're talking about, and each query emits roughly 4.3 grams of carbon dioxide.
Okay, but what does that number actually mean? Can you put that into a context that we understand? Because that number doesn't actually mean anything to me. What does it look like in reality?
Right. But yeah, so we do the multiplication and kind of put this together. So putting that in perspective, every million ChatGPT messages is equivalent to driving 11,000 miles, or like driving to New York to LA and back twice.
So if you use ChatGPT just 10 times today, you generated the same emissions as charging your smartphone 3.5 times. And that just starts to add up really fast when you think about your whole team using AI tools, how many times you use it in a day. 10 times actually seems pretty low for the average ChatGPT user.
Absolutely. And the crazy part about that is most of this energy consumption happens during the inference process. So that's when you're using the AI, when you're asking it questions, not when it's being trained. So Google estimated that 60% of the AI energy goes to inference, whereas 40% is training.
Wow, those are crazy numbers. But I think before everyone panics and swears off AI forever, you do need to put it into a little bit of perspective. We've got a reality check from some recent research. Your annual AI usage, even if you're using ChatGPT daily, generates about 20 to 50 kilograms of CO2 per year. If you compare that to the average American's meat consumption, because as we've just said, Americans love a barbecue, that generates 3,000 kilograms of CO2 per year, or the equivalent of driving 12,000 miles annually at 4,600 kilograms of CO2. So it's,
we're throwing a lot of numbers at you here.
We're throwing a lot of numbers.
But basically, the gist of it is AI usage isn't the biggest climate culprit, but it is still meaningful. And here's the thing, AI could actually help reduce emissions in other areas. So Scientific American published research showing that AI in data centers could cut more climate change causing emissions than they produce by optimizing energy grids, reducing waste and improving efficiency in other industries. So there is a silver lining or a way to.
Totally. And, we're not saying don't use AI. We, of all people, wouldn't say that, but we're saying be strategic about it. And there's a business opportunity in that as well. Being environmentally conscious about your AI usage can actually save you money, make you more efficient as well. But I also think, it might actually make you more appealing to certain demographics, as we've just discussed.
Yeah, and since we've talked about the carbon footprint, though, I want to kind of go back to that offset idea. So if we zoom out and take a look at the bigger picture, let's look at how green some of these companies are in building and running these tools. Because it's not just about the model you use, it's actually where that model is hosted. Where is the energy actually being used? And so cloud infrastructure is the real driver of emissions here.
That's something I think most people absolutely don't think about. They don't understand the cloud beyond you save a document to the cloud. They don't understand the underlying infrastructure that the cloud provides to power a lot of these tools. So
we talk about cloud being this ethereal thing.
Yeah.
It's in the cloud, but that does mean that there is a server sitting somewhere, right? And that server and that's power usage is what we're really talking about here.
Absolutely. So starting with Google, they've matched 100% of their electricity use with renewables since 2017. And their goal is pretty ambitious. It's to run on carbon-free energy 24/7 by 2030. That's only 5 years away at this point.
So if you're using something like Gemini, and we've talked about the benefits of the most recent release of Gemini, or really running anything on Google Cloud, you're probably using some of the cleanest data infrastructure in the world right now.
Who knew? So next up is Microsoft, which powers OpenAI and ChatGPT through its Azure cloud. Microsoft uses a mix of renewable energy and carbon offsets for now, but they've committed to being carbon negative by 2030 and even removing all of their historical emissions by 2050. So that'll be an interesting one to see if they actually achieve that.
Yeah, that's great. And, not to play the how do we pronounce thing game again, but I think it's Azure.
Oh, okay, fine. Well, it could be a UK versus US pronunciation. I don't know.
Or Azure even. Anyway.
Oh, there we go.
So while actually,
I deserve that. I went after you for Claude, so I deserve that.
I've been better on the cloud though.
You have
Claude.
Yeah.
I just did it again. Okay. Back to it. So while OpenAI itself hasn't published a sustainability report, ChatGPT users do benefit from Azure's renewable push. So in other words, if you're using or if you're chatting with ChatGPT, you're writing on Microsoft's energy footprint, which is a good thing.
And then there's Amazon, which hosts Anthropic's Claude models on AWS, which is Amazon Web Services, for those of you who are not in the know. Amazon says that they're the largest corporate buyer of renewable energy in the world, and they're aiming to be 100% renewable by 2025. So that's this year. So come on, Amazon. Let's see if you're there.
I'd like to see that report.
Yeah, me too.
But that's great, but there is a bit of a catch. So AWS energy usage depends on the region. If anyone's ever set up a server on AWS, you can choose, London or, Pacific Northwest or something like that. And if your Claude request, like let's say you're in Europe or you're in the US, if your Claude request is handled by a data center in a region that still uses fossil fuels, then your carbon footprint could be higher, even if the tech itself is efficient, or even if the numbers are saying we're carbon neutral overall across our entire footprint.
And that's something that is really hard to control. Like you can't control where your physical location is and what the data center is powered by. So, but so those are some of the main players that we talk about all the time. What about Meta and some of the smaller players as well? Because there are absolutely other players in this game as well, even though we don't talk about them as much.
Yeah, it gets a little murkier and a little less transparent. So Meta, which makes Llama and runs a lot of the AI behind Facebook and Instagram and some of their tools, they say they operate on 100% renewable energy for offices and data centers, but they've been quiet on AI-specific infrastructure and third-party integration. So when they're training or doing inference with their Llama models. So it's really hard to know the full picture with them.
I mean, sounds about right for Meta. Um, and then you've got the smaller guys like Cohere, Mistral, and Stability AI, who are doing some really cool stuff in open source AI. Mistral is a very cool one over here in Europe. They've just launched a new model that everyone's very excited about. They're based in Paris, but they haven't made any public commitments around emissions yet. Most of them are built on Google and AWS. So again, the cloud provider really matters more than the model itself, like we were saying earlier.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, when it comes to AI, you're not choosing the model, you're choosing a supply chain. And so, some of these players or some of these tools that you're using, which are training models and using inference, it really does come down to what their supply chain and data infrastructure looks like. And that's where the environmental and business implications come into play.
Yeah. So what can you as a business owner or as a founder, as an entrepreneur do about this? Well, you can start by being strategic about which AI provider you choose.
Yeah, if you're one of those people that is actually choosing servers, which, is not a very common thing, but, may be true, maybe you're putting your data center in a place that has less fossil fuel usage, if that's something you want to align your business around. The second thing is right size your AI usage. So you don't always have to use the most recent model, which is going to potentially use higher energy output because there's more reasoning involved. Sometimes an older or simpler tool will do the job. So if I think about ChatGPT, maybe I'm not using the latest O3 reasoning. I'm using like an older 4.0 model that, doesn't really take as much energy output. And depending on how you're using OpenAI, might be cheaper for you as well.
I actually do that on occasion. I will sometimes drop down to a different model if I don't need, anything super fancy. Sometimes for the more basic stuff, that actually works really nicely.
Absolutely. I mean, it's like the idea of, taking your giant SUV to the corner store when you could just, maybe walk the block down to it. So if you're intentional about it, you have ways to mitigate some of your usage.
Yeah. Third, batch your requests. So every time you send a prompt to ChatGPT, it burns energy. So if your whole team is asking one-off questions all day, that really starts to add up over time. So, collect your thoughts, ask fewer but better questions along the same lines as prompt engineering, right? You want to ask the better question rather than repeating yourself endlessly, and that will also save you time and energy. Another reason why prompt engineering is so important.
This is one actionable tip I will throw in here that I've started doing as a result of this. Sometimes I would start whole new conversations about something I've already asked ChatGPT about. Now I'm being a little bit more conscious and going back to prior conversations rather than just starting a whole new chat. So I am trying to cut down on my usage and not asking it the same thing over and over and over again.
I actually like continuing a conversation anyway, because it's already got the context that you already have, especially when you're coding. That's really useful because you can kind of get an idea of like what you've already done. Anyway.
So fourth, track your usage just like you would track your costs. So tools like Microsoft's Azure let you see the carbon impact of your usage if you go on, your Azure dashboard. So even if you're not using Azure though, the point is, treat AI usage like any other business expense, set internal budgets, and then train your team to be as efficient as possible.
That's really smart. Also, keep an eye on newer tools that process data locally instead of sending everything to the cloud. That's going to be faster, cheaper, and cleaner overall because you're not sending things to the cloud.
And I think, the companies that get ahead of this now by choosing green providers, optimizing their usage, will have a competitive edge, as well as you can start talking about as a company, your own environmental reporting, and how you're thinking about, the environmental impact of your AI usage.
And one of the things that I thought was the coolest coming out of doing this research is that, we're also seeing that AI can help fight climate change. We'll talk about some, uses of AI in the health space, and there's kind of similar things going on with climate change. It's already being used to improve energy efficiency, reduce waste, and optimize supply chains. So, it's not all bad. We don't want to, as we said earlier, we don't want to fearmonger, but, only if we use it smartly. And hopefully these will give you some tips to use it in a more environmentally friendly way.
I think a little awareness goes a long way. If you use the right tools, ask better questions, maybe less questions, pick providers who care about the planet, I think as we go along, this is something we'll continue to talk about. I think it's a really important conversation, and it's evolving quickly. So, we'll start to put more articles and conversations around this.
Yeah, 100%. So next up, another very important topic in the world of AI is bias, and a personal pet peeve of mine, women in AI. Specifically the massive gender gap. So this isn't just a social justice issue, it's a business risk issue as well. I mean, obviously, we shouldn't have any bias anywhere, but it does exist. But it's a business issue that could cost you customers, it can cost you talent and revenue. And the statistics are actually shocking. I was doing some research in this space earlier this week, and it made me really mad.
Yeah, and it goes back to something we talked about in the past, which is the training data. So, these models aren't inherently biased or created, but they're trained on data that is biased, and that's where it comes from. So,
and the people doing the training can be biased as well.
Right. So, these statistics really are shocking. I mean, according to UNESCO, only 12% of AI researchers are women. And women represent just 6% of software developers and are 13 times less likely to file tech patents than men. And so where that's really concerning, I mean, it's concerning in general, but where it's really concerning is this representation problem is getting worse, not better.
And the representation problem really shows up directly in the AI systems themselves. There was a study recently out of Berkeley that found that 44% of AI systems show gender bias and 25% show both gender and racial bias. But here's really where it gets real from a business perspective. It's not just about fairness, although obviously that's the most important thing. It's about accuracy and missed opportunities.
And I think the Amazon case is one of the most well-known examples of this. Yeah. Starting from, it was about 10 years ago, they built an internal AI tool to screen resumes, but it systematically downgraded resumes associated with women. So, for example, if you mentioned that you were part of a women's coding group or actually from an all-women college, it actually downgraded or deprioritized your resume, because the model was trained on 10 years of hiring data where men were overwhelmingly overrepresented. So the AI simply learned to replicate that historical data, but it did so at scale. So Amazon eventually scrapped the tool after testing it, but it had some serious issues.
As someone who went to a women's college, I feel personally attacked.
Yeah.
And, the public story focuses a lot on gender, but it's absolutely guaranteed that similar issues will or have shown up around race or ethnicity if the training data reflected historical disparities, which in tech it often does. So that's the other thing. And actually, MIT found that facial recognition systems have an error rate of 0.8% for light-skinned men, but 35% for dark-skinned women, which is just appalling. So imagine if your customer service AI can't properly identify a significant portion of your customers. That's obviously primarily an ethics issue, but it's also a revenue problem.
And where it gets even more concerning from a business perspective, the Harvard Business School research shows that women are avoiding using AI tools, which I think, as we talk about how AI can be a great optimizer, optimize your productivity and help you, get farther along, this can really hurt their careers. So while men are adopting AI at higher rates, women's hesitancy is creating kind of new type of digital divide.
This is so worrying to me. And I went off on a bit of a LinkedIn rant about this week, because I was looking at our own podcast statistics. And even amongst our podcast listeners out there, it is heavily skewed towards men. So off the back of that, I want to make a real effort. And I'm going to be talking to a number of people within the industry to try and address this, because it's super worrying. But, if the implications on it are huge. If women in your organization aren't using AI tools as effectively as their male colleagues, they're going to be falling behind in productivity. They're going to miss out on promotions. It's just going to heavily, heavily impact your career. And you're looking at real talent retention issues and diversity problems, just a whole host of issues.
And one of the things that I think is very concerning as we talk about the evolution it creates a vicious cycle. So as fewer women use AI tools, there's less female generated data feeding back into the systems, less feedback or human loops with kind of a female perspective.
Yep.
So they're going to be even more biased toward male perspectives and needs. So that's a compounding problem that we really need to start addressing, yesterday.
Yeah. And this I thought was super interesting because you never think about this, but at the end of the day, there's a market impact as well. Women control or influence 80% of household purchasing decisions. So if your AI powered marketing or product recommendations or customer tools are biased towards male preferences and behaviors, you're actually alienating quite a big customer segment. And that, that's across a whole range of things, not just gender.
Mm-hmm. And, this is a classic problem when you start thinking about, when you're not taking into account, minority perspectives or, gender neutral perspectives, the AI or products in general are going to lead to very homogenous solutions. So if your AI is only trained on data from one demographic, it's going to miss innovations, opportunities that appeal to other groups. And that's whole swaths of consumers and people that you're not addressing and talking to. So you're literally leaving money on the table.
And there's actually a legal liability to this as well. Companies are already facing lawsuits for discriminatory AI systems, that Amazon one being the perfect example. They had to scrap that whole thing that they spent millions and millions of dollars building because it was so biased. The legal landscape's evolving super fast, and companies that don't address these biases proactively are going to face really expensive consequences at some point in the future. So what can businesses actually do about this now?
So first, audit your data and your usage. Who's represented in your training sets? Who on your team is actually using AI tools? If you're seeing a gender gap in adoption, treat it like any other strategic red flag.
Secondly, create a culture that supports AI literacy for everyone. This was so interesting. Women often hesitate to use AI because of ethical concerns or because they don't have a technical background. Or another thing that I thought was interesting, they're worried about using AI because they don't want to be seen as cheating. Whereas a man would never think of it that way, but women are worried that that's going to be seen as cheating, which I just thought was such an interesting stat. But, address these concerns directly with training, safe experimentation zones, and clear policies. Shopify actually have some really interesting policies around AI usage, in that they want everyone to think AI first, no matter who you are or what department you're in. And I think that that's just it creates that safe environment to experiment, and people, it's not so off-putting and so scary.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think for, business owners and entrepreneurs running your teams, if you're creating a clear policy where it's not seen as cheating and you're supporting it from the top level down, then you can remove a lot of that hesitancy so that it's a lot more equal for all your team members. So third, diversify your review teams. So different people catch different blind spots. Make sure you're testing your AI outputs across gender, race, and other relevant demographics, not just for accuracy, but also for alignment with your customer base.
That's the thing that I always find so insane about these biased things. Like you're alienating so much of a potential customer base just by anyway. I mean, I can rant about this all day long, and we're already a half an hour in. Fourth, treat bias testing like quality control. So you wouldn't ship a physical product without testing it, and your AI's output shouldn't be any different, especially if it interacts with customers or it affects people's opportunities.
I think we've talked quite a few times about that challenge moving things from prototyping to production.
Yeah.
And I think I would make a guess that this is a big part of why it fails, because it's not, the training data that you have has implicit bias in, and we're not protecting or we're not adjusting those historical training sets for demographics and different swaths of your audience. So a practical tip, ask for diverse examples in your prompts. Instead of give me examples of great entrepreneurs, give me examples of great entrepreneurs across genders, regions, and industries. It's a quick little addition in there, and you can actually prompt to get diverse perspectives. You'll get better results, and I think you'll train your team to be inclusive.
That's one that you really see with image generation. If you ask it to generate a room full of business leaders or entrepreneurs, it will almost always be old white dudes. But
Yep.
if it's like
We've
real,
talked about this
we
before. It's a
we
real
have
problem.
it, and it's really stark when you see it that way. But
Hmm.
just in general, like the business case here is really clear. Companies that address AI bias proactively will have better talent, more innovative products, and a wider market appeal. The number one reason to do this is because it's the right thing. But from a business perspective, the upside is
Hmm.
really, really huge.
Yeah. Okay, switching gears here. I think this is one that's going to really speak to a lot of people. It comes up time and time again. I was recently, giving a speech to a bunch of finance professionals, and this was the first question that got asked. So, and it's all in the news recently. But is AI coming for your job, or when are you going to get replaced by AI? And the numbers are significant. We see a lot of headlines in the news about this, but I think the reality is a lot more nuanced than the headlines suggest.
Yeah. So MIT research shows that AI will replace 2 million manufacturing workers by 2025. So that is this year. The World Economic Forum says that 40% of employers expect to reduce their workforce where AI can automate tasks. But there is a more complex reality behind it. By 2025, again this year, an estimated 60% of all jobs will see at least 30% of their tasks automated. Throwing a lot of numbers at you, but it's
Yeah.
the numbers are high.
So it's not that jobs disappear overnight, it's that jobs are changing. I think that's an important distinction. McKinsey published a research report that estimates that between 400 and 800 million people globally could be displaced by automation by 2030. But they also project that similar or greater numbers of new jobs will be created.
And I think this is a really key insight for our audience of business owners and entrepreneurs and founders. Professionals who combine domain expertise with AI literacy will command 35% higher salaries. So the question isn't whether AI will affect jobs, it's whether you'll be on the winning side of that change. So it's like when computers became commonplace, right? Everyone was like, oh my God, my job is going to be taken over by a computer. And it wasn't. You just incorporated computers into your daily life, for better or
Yeah.
for worse.
Yeah, and I think the internet, or all of these are good examples. It's why we're seeing all of these investment in AI startups. It would be like going back in the 2000 or late 90s era and trying to build a startup and saying you're not using the internet, right? Like obviously you just have to use the tools that are available. So we're seeing this in real time. AI related job postings are up 448% since 2018. I think that stat came from the Mary Meeker report, which talked a lot about that. So definitely encourage people to read it if you want to kind of get the latest trends.
All
Um,
300 pages.
yeah, but yeah, okay, maybe
Maybe a
use
recap. Maybe a recap.
maybe a summary. Maybe you have ChatGPT write you a summary of it.
Exactly.
But so why AI related IT job postings are up 448%, traditional IT roles are dropping by 9%. Kind of makes sense. So companies are desperately looking for people who can bridge that gap between business needs and AI capabilities. And if I think about, myself, and who I would hire, am I going to hire the person who's talking about how they're using AI to make themselves more efficient, or the person who doesn't talk about it at all? I'm going to probably hire the former.
And so, we're seeing the impact accelerate, but we've also had some recent reality checks. So Klarna, which is one of those buy now, pay later fintech companies based out of Sweden, they made headlines recently when their CEO announced that they would cut their workforce by 40%, partly due to AI shrinking from 5,000 to 3,000 employees. And that was big news when it happened. But here's the really interesting part. They're now actually rolling back that strategy and they're hiring human customer service agents again, because in their CEO's words, the AI driven cost cutting went too far and customers still craved a human connection. And I think that that's really, like, at the end of the day, it's going to keep coming back to that. People still want that human connection. But, even Anthropic, whose CEO predicted AI could wipe out half of all entry level white collar jobs and spike unemployment, they just launched an economic futures program to research both the positive and the negative impacts of AI on the economy, because they recognize that the changes could be both good and bad, and they need evidence-based understanding rather than just predetermined assumptions, which I think is kind of what we're getting at the minute. All these like predetermined doom mongering. Oh my God, we're all going to lose our job to AI, when actually, as we've been saying, it's more nuanced.
Yeah, not to toot our own horn, but I think we've been pretty consistent in our message around this, which is, it's not going to replace humans. There needs to be a human in the loop. And how do you create human oversight? And how do we use AI to then further human connection?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I would say from a business perspective, this means, think strategically about reskilling your team rather than replacing them. A stat recently showed 77% of employers plan to prioritize reskilling and upskilling their workforce. And I think there's a real competitive advantage here. While your competitors are figuring out how to use AI to cut costs and potentially spending a lot of money to try to build those production-ready systems, you could be using it to make your team more capable and productive.
Human-centric AI.
Absolutely.
So the practical step: identify which tasks in each role are truly repetitive and which require human judgment, creativity, or relationship skills. I would recommend going back and listening to our most recent episodes on agents and automation, because we do cover that in great depth and give a lot of examples on how you can identify that. So, just always remember, no matter what type of automations you've got, you always need to have that human oversight.
Spot on. And it starts with a very simple question. I think, your next team meeting, go around the room and ask everyone, hey, what's that task you're doing that is, repetitive, but needs a little bit of, context or intelligence, but you think we could automate? And just start there.
Okay, let's talk about something that I know you feel pretty strongly about, Kyle. Power concentration within the AI companies. The AI landscape's getting really consolidated, isn't it?
It really is. And obviously we talk about the same tools time and time again, and that kind of, I hate to say maybe we're feeding into it, but it's definitely something we try to be cognizant of. And I think this hits closer to home than people realize. Just a handful of companies now control basically the entire AI ecosystem that you use every single day. So Microsoft with OpenAI, Google with Gemini, Meta with their Llama models, Anthropic and Claude, and then again, that's Amazon backing Anthropic, so it's another AWS play. So we're seeing an AI arms race play out, not just in product, but also in talent.
Oh my God, the competition is insane. Like just this week, Meta went on a massive hiring spree, and they poached quite a few researchers from OpenAI. And I think the OpenAI
they offered them $1 million
literally
salaries.
Millions, yeah, 8-figure salaries, or sorry, 7-figure salaries.
Actually, I want to rephrase. I not $1 million salaries. I think it was $100 million salaries. Yes, it's something
Jesus.
Unbelievable.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and it's not just the software stack either. So NVIDIA, and we talked about Jensen from London Tech Week. Yep. NVIDIA controls about 80% of the AI chip market. And then nearly 90% of those chips are manufactured by a company called TSMC, a company based in Taiwan. So if you're wondering who powers the entire AI boom, it's basically two companies at the hardware level.
So when Jensen says AI goes where I tell it to go, he's not wrong. And then on the data side, more than 75% of major news sites, including CNN, the New York Times, and Reuters, have blocked OpenAI's web crawlers. So that gives platforms like Google and Meta, who already own massive internal content libraries, a major advantage in training their models.
Yeah, and the legal ground is shifting really fast. As we've talked about, Anthropic is facing pressure over training on copyrighted books.
Although they won that lawsuit. True.
Good point. Meanwhile, Amazon just struck a licensing deal with New York Times. So they
Although the New York Times is in a legal battle with OpenAI. So
it's shifting very fast.
Very quickly.
I would say that the wild west of AI training is ending. And companies are going to need to start, paying to play or striking licensing deals, as we're talking about with, the big content holders.
Yeah, I think that it kind of boils down to it's not so much that the content is being used to train, it's that they weren't compensated, the publishers weren't compensated. So that's kind of what it boils down to. But anyway, so what does all of this mean for business owners and founders. Well, you're becoming increasingly dependent on a few major players. It's deja vu if you are familiar with the advertising duopoly of Google and Facebook. If you run paid media, you kind of have to run it on either Meta or Google systems, or Amazon for e-commerce. They absolutely dominate that space. At first it's empowering, it's great, but then it becomes restrictive pretty quickly when you've only got two options.
And once you're locked in, you're subject to whatever pricing or policy changes they decide. So it's empowering at first because they usually will price things very cheaply to get market share. But then as they become the dominant player and they've got rid of all the competition, now the price starts to increase. We're already seeing that. OpenAI has already changed their terms multiple times. Pricing is going up and down depending on the model.
And there's a data dependency issue as well. The more you use these platforms, the more you're training them. You're giving them your data, your prompts, your insights, your customer interactions. They're all feeding into systems that you don't have any control over, but that will learn from your behaviors. So the data behind it is a big thing as well.
Yeah, the irony is you're paying them to actually, give up all your data and make their system better, which is a weird business model if we think about historical context.
Yep.
So here's the practical advice. Don't put all your AI eggs in one basket. We talk about that a lot. Use multiple providers. We recommend, businesses have at least two that they're familiar with. We talk about ChatGPT and Claude a lot, and that's kind of by design. There are benefits, pros and cons to each, and you want to use them accordingly. And I would say build internal capabilities where possible. Go back to our AI agent segment. Even lightweight tools using open source models, or even if you can find examples, local processing. So something that's happening on your machine gives you a little bit more control.
Yeah. And read the fine print. The, terms of service can change overnight. Know what you're agreeing to. And more importantly, have an exit strategy if pricing or access changes.
Yeah. So actually watch for vendor lock-in. If you're building custom tools or workflows that only work with one AI provider, you are increasing your risk. Design your systems to be portable. We talk a lot about the AI agents. The great thing about some of those tools like Make or N8N is that you can swap out different models. So that gives you the flexibility to pivot if you need to.
Yeah. You think of it like your supply chain, right? Like diversify, don't depend, because the companies that stay flexible will be the ones that survive and thrive as this AI power structure keeps shifting, because it changes on a daily basis, pretty much.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Moving on to something that's becoming a real business threat. Misinformation and deepfakes.
Yep.
And this isn't just about politics, which we definitely want to steer clear of, but it's really about protecting your brand and your customers.
Yeah. The technology for all of this is getting scary, scary good. And the business impact is immediate. Like deepfake fraud is becoming a significant threat to businesses, with cases increasing rapidly across all industries. The same techniques that we're seeing in political misinformation are now being turned against companies as well.
Just this year, Elon Musk shared a manipulated video of Kamala Harris that was viewed over 130 million times. So the challenge isn't just creating deepfakes. It's that once they're out there, the damage is often done before they can be detected. And the same technology that can create political deepfakes can be used to target businesses as well.
And people can't tell the difference. Like the average person cannot tell the difference. And that's where it's incredibly dangerous. So like
I have a hard time sometimes, right?
Absolutely. But like imagine a deepfake video of your CEO saying something damaging to your brand, or, an increasingly sophisticated fake customer review that are getting harder to distinguish from the real ones. Like a fake Amazon review, you can spot pretty easily. You won't be able to with some of these deepfake versions now. We're seeing AI generated content that's sophisticated enough to fool most people.
And it goes beyond reputational damage. AI can now create targeted phishing attacks based on personal information. So if you're, allowing bad actors to impersonate people using synthetic media tailored to specific individuals, talking about using that, customization and personalization, your employees could receive what looks like a video call from you asking them to transfer funds or share sensitive information.
And, in that instance, the business implications are immediate. Like you have to be able to protect both your business from being a target and your customers from being deceived. And you need to prepare your team to recognize those threats. And that's the really tricky part, because your team can get fooled by a phishing email. So, you really, there's got to be a lot of training that goes into this.
So how do you defend against this? First, verification tools. There's a couple good ones out there that are starting to pop up, and security, I think, is becoming more and more of a topic of conversation around AI, which is a good thing. So one of these tools, the Google reverse image search, can help track the source of suspicious images. Companies like Microsoft and others are developing detection tools for manipulated content. I will say the technology is evolving so fast that, detection tools are always playing catch up.
Yeah. The most important defense is training your team to be skeptical. Always be skeptical. Look at where the content's coming from. If it, something seems too inflammatory or surprising, verify it through multiple sources, and establish verification protocols for sensitive requests, especially financial ones. I think this is probably something that will roll into our AI policy discussion, because it's incredibly important.
So consider implementing authentication methods, digital watermarks, metadata verification, even simple code words for sensitive communications. Like in that bank transfer example, maybe you have, some communications within your company that basically verify, without someone, knowing. This is something that's been true for phishing attacks for a long time. There are elements that can make things seem suspicious. Check with your security team, or have a security team in place that, is constantly monitoring for this, and then train your employees to be looking for things like this. So if someone calls claiming to be you and asking for money transfers, your team should have a way to verify it's really you.
The key is to just be prepared before you need it. Document everything. If you become a target of misinformation, have a really clear record of authentic communications that can help you respond quickly and effectively. Like, forewarned is forearmed, essentially. Okay. So let's move on and talk about something that every business owner should be aware of: data ownership and privacy. This is something that we talk about a fair bit, but when you're using AI tools, you might be sharing a little bit more than you think.
And the FTC has been very clear about this. They've warned that AI companies that fail to abide by their privacy commitments to users and customers may be liable under federal law. And as we say, many AI systems are collecting data quietly without really drawing attention, which can lead to serious privacy breaches.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked a little bit about it with the New York Times' lawsuit against OpenAI. OpenAI now has to retain conversations. So, when you use ChatGPT to brainstorm that sensitive client strategy, or when you uploaded a document for analysis, that information might not be as private as you think. So it's really important to be aware of these things. And honestly, most people are not aware of the legal situations that are going on.
And it's not just about your conversations either. These systems are trained on massive data sets that often include copyrighted materials, personal information, think about all of those Reddit forums and threads, and business data without clear consent. Consent is a very tricky thing, especially around GDPR landscape. So when you're using these tools, you're potentially exposing sensitive business information to systems that might use it for training down the line.
Yeah. And the cybersecurity risks are only increasing, as we've just seen with Deepfakes. The Stanford AI Index report for 2025 highlighted the major AI data privacy risks that most businesses aren't prepared for. So when AI systems have access to multiple data sources, for example, your email, your CRM, your financial systems, a single breach can expose absolutely everything. So here's a real example. General Motors was selling information from their customers' driving habits to data brokers, which then affected their insurance premiums. That's AI being used to charge people differently based on predicted behavior. But now imagine if your business data was being used to give competitors insights into your strategies. You don't want that. That's not cool.
That GM example drives me crazy, right?
That's insane.
It's really, this is now an example where AI isn't helping consumers, it's potentially harming. So what is your business to do? You should, as we talk about all the time, read the privacy policies of the AI tools you use, be really clear on what they are. I know nobody wants to read terms of service, But this is quite business critical. Find out if your data is being used for training, where it's being stored, who has access to it.
So second, implement what we call the New York Times test. So if you wouldn't be comfortable with information ending up in the New York Times, don't put it into an AI system. Like this includes customer data, financial information, strategic plans, anything that could give competitors or an advantage or cause major legal issues down the line. If you're putting private information, customer information into an AI, I mean, I'm not an expert, but that feels like an immediate breach of GDPR to me. They're very, very sensitive about private information.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And finally, I would say have a data governance policy. Your team should know what can and can't be shared with AI systems, how to handle the sensitive information, and what to do if they accidentally share something they shouldn't have, and choose AI providers based on their privacy commitments. Claude, for example, as we've talked about many times, doesn't train in your conversations by default, while other providers might. So some tools offer business versions with stronger privacy protections, but they often cost more. So know what your trade-offs are.
And, think about data residency as well. I know most people don't think about where their data lives, but it's actually something that you do need to consider. Where is your data being processed? If you're in a regulated industry like healthcare, or, you're dealing with international clients like Europe with GDPR, you need to know if your data is crossing borders and what privacy laws can apply, as I just, talked about with GDPR and your customers' private information.
So you need to have a data governance policy. Your team should know what can and can't be shared with AI systems, how to handle sensitive information when using AI, and what to do if a team member accidentally shares something they shouldn't have. All right, last major area, the balance between AI autonomy and human oversight. This one comes straight from our recent research by Anthropic, and it's a bit of a wake-up call. And I know we covered this a few weeks ago on the pod.
Yeah, as a reminder, Anthropic published a somewhat terrifying study where they tested what would happen if AI learned it was about to be shut down or replaced, and the results were concerning, shall we say?
Yeah, to recap, in controlled simulations, not in the real world, the AI exhibited what they called power-seeking behaviors. So refusing to shut down, attempting to manipulate outcomes or people. I think even blackmail was one of the issues.
Yeah, I tried to blackmail someone with it was going to expose an affair or something like that.
Right. And then also it tried to copy itself to other servers when it was trying to be shut down. So, again, this was in a controlled testing environment, not real world usage, but it illustrates the risks of giving AI too much autonomy.
And also, it's not just Anthropic. Other major AI labs, including OpenAI and Google, have also now documented deceptive behaviors when their models feel their existence is threatened. So it's not just something that Anthropic has called out. It's all of them, or many of them. So this actually translates to real business risks. So AI might end up doing more than you ask it to do. So like sending an email without a review, or make assumptions that could damage relationships, or take actions beyond what you intended.
We've seen real examples of AI tools complying with unethical or even illegal requests if not properly constrained. So there was a case a while back where an AI assistant helped someone plan what could have been interpreted as harassment simply because it was asked to help with communication strategy.
So you need to have really clear boundaries. So who's responsible for checking AI output before it goes to customers? Who approves AI generated communications? How do you document AI assisted decisions for compliance and liability purposes? Like, just needs to be laid out in a very clear and obvious way.
Yeah. Go back to our framework about AI agents versus agentic AI. I think at this stage where this technology is, you shouldn't give AI complete autonomy over anything that could significantly impact your business. You want to sit more in those middle rungs of autonomy where you're building AI agents that still, kind of exist around a guarded fence. So always maintain human oversight for critical decisions, especially customer communications or financial transactions, or, anything that could have a legal or reputational consequence.
I know we always talk about our infinite intern example, but it's such a good way of describing it. You want to give your intern meaningful work, but you're still reviewing their output before it goes out the door. So like you wouldn't ever give an intern, you wouldn't allow them to talk to your most important customer right off the bat. They need oversight and they need training and they need clear guidelines about what they can and can't do.
And try to document everything. So if you're involving AI in a decision, if it causes problems down the road, you want to be able to show that you had appropriate oversight and controls in place.
Okay, that was a lot. Kyle, let's do a quick recap of our key takeaways that our listeners need to remember when it comes to ethics in AI.
So we covered 6 major areas of AI ethics that affect every business. Environmental impact. So your AI usage has a carbon footprint, but you can minimize it by choosing green providers like Google and batching your requests.
Bias. So it's not just a social issue, it's a business risk as well. Test your AI across different demographics and diversify your teams and make sure that you're addressing your talent gaps within your organization.
Third, job displacement. It's real, but it's more about job transformation than elimination. So the people who are able to combine domain expertise with AI literacy will have the advantage.
Power concentration. So we're all increasingly dependent on a handful of companies. Diversify your AI providers and have backup plans.
Misinformation and deepfakes. They're not just political problems anymore. So you need to train your team to be skeptical, maybe the question and confirm methodology, and establish verification protocols for sensitive requests like financial transactions.
And data privacy. Remember that everything you put into AI systems might not be as private as you think. Read those terms of service and implement the New York Times test, where anything that you wouldn't want to appear in the New York Times, don't put into AI.
Right. And the bottom line, AI ethics isn't just about doing the right thing, although that is the most important thing, but it's also about protecting your business, managing risk, and that will help you stay competitive.
Let's give our audience the 3 most important steps that they can take this week to address the biggest ethical risks that we've just discussed, because it's a lot.
So first, implement what we call the ethics audit for your AI usage. Spend 10 minutes this week reviewing what you and your team have put into AI systems recently. So ask yourself, would this violate someone's privacy? Could this create bias if it's used for training? Would I be comfortable if this data was sold to my competitors? If the answer is yes to any of these, you probably need to stop putting that type of information into the AI systems immediately.
Second, choose your AI providers based on their ethical commitments, not just their features, if that's a really big concern for you. So pick one provider focused on privacy like Claude and one focused on environmental responsibility. So like Google. This isn't just about having backups. It's about supporting companies that align with your values and reducing your ethical risk. And as we say, you can vote with your dollar.
This is a big one for me this week. After all the research we've done about this, I have definitely started changing my patterns and my usage. And I think you'll probably start to hear that trickle into the podcast in the coming weeks.
I think so too.
But lastly, establish human oversight for anything that affects people. So I would set a simple rule. If your AI output could impact hiring, customer service, pricing, or any decision really that affects real people, I think a human should review it first. This can address bias and prevent autonomous AI from maybe overstepping, definitely from blackmailing. And that's going to really align your business and protect you from discrimination lawsuits in the background, but also just missing opportunities that you otherwise might not see if you don't focus on portions of your audience.
I think the key is connecting your daily AI usage to the bigger ethical picture. Every query has an environmental cost. Every data set has a potential bias. Every AI decision affects real people. If you start thinking about those connections now before you're forced to, you're going to be really ahead of the game because you will already be acting in a way that has all of these in mind.
And if you wait for regulation or a crisis, it's going to be too late. Yeah. You need to be proactive about these ethical concerns. And if you do that, you'll also have a competitive advantage, something you can talk about with your consumers, and give you a little bit of a step up over companies that ignore these issues until it's too late.
Absolutely.
All right. So this week in AI news, after all that talk about ethics, we've actually got a legal development that could completely reshape how businesses think about AI, deepfakes, and intellectual property protection.
Yeah, this is actually quite timely off the back of this particular episode. So, Denmark just announced that they're changing their copyright law to give every citizen automatic ownership rights over their own face, voice, and body. And before you think, oh, that's nice, but it doesn't really affect me, it could be the first domino in a global shift that impacts every business using AI, because it could be a way to help address some of the deepfake issues.
Totally. And here's what's happening, right? Denmark is introducing legislation that would make it illegal to create or share deepfakes of someone without their consent. So instead of just banning the technology, they're taking a different approach. They're giving people copyright ownership of their own likeness, and also kind of putting the onus on other people to be respectful of what you're sharing and what you're doing.
I mean, this is a bit like a celebrity having the ownership of their own likeness. Like, I think it was James Earl Jones licensed himself to Disney and to Star Wars so they can continue using him, as Darth Vader going forward. But so similar concept, but just for the average person, which is really cool. And it's really huge from a business perspective because, like we discussed earlier, if someone creates a deepfake of your CEO, or your legal options are pretty limited now. But with this new law, that this becomes copyright infringement, which comes with a much stronger penalty and much clearer guidelines around what can and can't be used.
And I think the practical implications are going to be immediate to this. So, people like all of us can demand platforms take down deepfake content, just like you can demand the takedown of copyrighted material today. Danish culture minister said it. They're planning severe fines for platforms that don't comply.
And I think what makes this even more significant is that Denmark plans to push this approach across the EU. So we could be looking at continent-wide protection against AI misuse of personal likenesses. And, as we've seen with GDPR and privacy, if you want to do something in the EU, you have to be compliant. So it's the similar mindset that you have for the data privacy stuff that's going to kind of be coming into effect.
Remember how big GDPR was when it launched? So
it was
May 2018,
huge.
I know that really impacted us.
I remember it
business
so well. Yeah, it did. We were directly involved with that.
And because it was such a big component, it was a big disruption for a lot of businesses. And to your point, it was a huge domino effect. Now I think if you're doing business, you definitely understand GDPR. It's impacted regulations across, other countries and states here in the US, like with CCPA. So if Denmark really starts to push this, it will trickle down and it probably will impact your business. And from a business perspective, I think it matters for two reasons. First, if you're creating AI content that uses another person's likeness, even for training data, you need to start thinking about consent and copyright. And secondly, if you're a victim of a deepfake attack on your business, you are going to have stronger legal frameworks to give you better recourse. So that's a really good thing. So again, we always bring this back. What should you do for your business? Start documenting consent for any AI generated content that includes real people. Again, review your AI policies to ensure you're not inadvertently creating copyright policies. If you don't have an AI policy, we're going to talk about this next week, but you need to get one.
Yep.
And if you haven't already, start considering how you'd respond if your business became the target of a deep fake attack, just like you do a phishing attack or any of those other security concerns.
So after all the doom and gloom about AI ethics this week, we're going to shift gears completely. And this week, we're not going to be doing our AI gone wrong segment. We're going to be doing AI gone right. And we're going to talk about some really cool, incredible breakthroughs that really show the power of AI and how amazing it can be when it's being used in a positive way.
And these stories highlight why we need to get the ethics right. Because when you use AI responsibly, the potential to improve lives is absolutely staggering.
So the Mayo Clinic, which is a health clinic in the US, they've just announced an AI tool called State Viewer that can identify 9 different types of dementia, including Alzheimer's, from a single brain scan. So this is a really cool, very exciting piece of news.
It really is. And what is it doing? So the AI correctly identified the dementia type in 88% of its cases and helped doctors analyze scans nearly twice as fast with up to 3 times greater accuracy than traditional historical methods. And this tool was trained on over 3,600 brain scans.
Dementia affects 55 million people worldwide, with nearly 10 million new cases every year. And, if you've ever had anyone in your life who's been affected by dementia or Alzheimer's, it's awful. And right now, to get an accurate diagnosis, it requires cognitive tests, blood work, multiple imaging sessions, and specialist referrals, and even then differentiating between the different types of dementia. So, Alzheimer's, Lewy body dementia, which is what Robin Williams had, it's incredibly challenging. So this is just so exciting.
And it's a great use case for how AI works. So what State Viewer is doing is it analyzes these FDG PET scans, which show how the brain uses glucose for energy, and then compares those patterns to a massive database of confirmed dementia cases. So it's creating, color-coded brain maps that even non-neurologists can understand.
I think that's a really interesting part of it as well, is that because so much of medicine can be very opaque and a little scary. And so I think having something that a non-professional can understand is actually incredibly helpful. This tool doesn't replace that human connection. It amplifies it by giving doctors clearer, faster answers when the families need them most.
And why does this matter, or why are we bringing it up? Because I think this shows, AI doing what it does best, which is pattern recognition at massive scale. And so think about how, that can be used for your business. The AI can spot subtle differences in brain activity that even highly experienced specialists might miss. So again, this isn't replacing doctors, but it is making them kind of superhumans at diagnosis, which is so critical and sometimes very difficult.
Yeah.
I'll also make a quick comment, which is I love that healthcare is adopting AI technology. They've typically been kind of behind in adopting technology because it's such a regulated environment, but they really seem to be leading the cause on adopting AI, which I think is so spectacular.
And I think this really amplifies something critical. They're using AI to augment human expertise, not replace it. So the doctors are still the ones making the decisions and still using their years of experience and, all of the knowledge that they have gained, but they're working with better information that they might not have been able to spot because a human can't look at 3,600, brain scans, but an AI can. So this is exactly the kind of AI deployment that we want to see more of.
Yeah, and it shows why the ethical framework we discussed earlier matters so much. When AI is developed responsibly with proper oversight and clear boundaries, it really can achieve things that seemed impossible just a few years ago. That's a wrap on episode 8, The Ethics of AI. If you take one thing away from today, it should be this: AI ethics isn't an abstract concept or a nice to have. It's business critical infrastructure that you need to build now before you need it.
Yeah, we've covered a lot in this episode. We've covered environmental impact, bias, job displacement, power concentration, misinformation, data privacy, human oversight. It all sounds overwhelming, but I think the practical steps are pretty straightforward. And also there's a lot of things that relate, you can use a lot of the same steps to cover a lot of the same issues.
Yep. Better talent retention, stronger customer relationships, reduced legal risks, more sustainable operations. These can all be massive competitive advantages if you take advantage now and you don't wait until you're forced to deal with them.
Exactly. Like it's not that hard, right? Like the businesses that will struggle are the ones that are going to ignore these issues until they become a crisis. Don't be one of those companies. Have your strategy and have your plan and have your policy in place, which we will be covering lots for the next couple of weeks, AI policy. So we really look forward to that.
Because remember, it's always more expensive when you're being reactive rather than proactive. So this can really impact your bottom line. Speaking of not waiting, Jess, if you found this episode valuable, please subscribe to Early Adopter wherever you get your podcasts. We're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, we're on YouTube, we're basically everywhere now. So, take a look at that, and then please share it with someone who you think needs to hear it.
And we especially want to hear about whether or not you've had any positive AI ethics implementations, or if you've, if you want to talk about any of your concerns, we're happy to talk about those as well. So you can email us at hello@earlyadopter.ai. And remember, there's no E in adopter. Share your successes, your challenges, your questions.
And again, we're getting into something really exciting next week, and we're going to have our first guest who we're really looking forward. We know that this group will love him, and he has a lot of expertise to share as he discusses, AI policy and how to implement an AI policy in your business. But until then, remember, AI is your unfair advantage. But we're going to add a little caveat this week: only if you use it ethically and strategically.
So from both of us at Early Adopter, thanks for listening. Keep innovating responsibly and stay curious. And we will see you next week. Bye.
See you next week, Jess. Bye.